Y'all, the biggest shadow spell update ever is coming to Wizard101, and today the teasers for the upcoming changes to every shadow enhanced balance spell and balance Scion drop. So these were originally covered by a content creator named Daniel Sunsword. I will link the original video in the description. Please check them out. But y'all, this one is a biggie. I feel like everyone thinks a balance is ridiculous, and we'll see. Are these shads gonna matter in PvE and PvP? So starting right off with what I would argue is the most iconic shadow spell for balance, Gaze of Fate. What you see on your screen is what they're going to be doing to Gaze of Fate. Now, if you've been watching all of these videos, you already know that. But one of the biggest parts of the shadow spell update is that while right now shadow enhanced spells cost 2 shadow pips in PvP, every shadow enhanced spell will now cost 1, whether you use it in PvP or PvE. And that's what really makes this specific Gaze of Change update so insane, because the PvE path isn't even really getting an update. They haven't really released elements for it. But the one allowed in PvP for 1 shad, we're looking at a really sizable amount of damage with a double hit. So one of the hits is balance. The other hit is random. It still adds up to a pretty decent amount. And balance is retaining its ability to hit and bubble. Now, in my opinion, this is actually like super relevant. When they did that double shadow pip change, one of the spells that immediately fell out of balance PvP in general was Gaze of Fate, right? While a hit and bubble is something that every school probably wants to have, 2 shadow pips, and that is just really hard to justify waiting for, justify bubble. 1 pip Gaze of Fate is gonna be a staple in every balance's toolkit. And honestly, I'm surprised by how much damage this shadow enhanced spell is still keeping, right? It's going from a 700 damage hit to a 500 damage hit, but you're saving an entire shad. And because the utility that you're getting is a bubble, I feel like that shad is completely, for the fact that it's 1, is completely useless, right? You could ideally, if you have 2 shads, you could Gaze of Fate back to back like you used to be able to. That is the main reason why this spell was good to begin with. I'm gonna be honest, I remember when Gaze of Fate was enchantable and it was 1 shad, so that was like way back when. And I would argue stats have gotten so good, pierce and damage and crit and all of that have gotten so good that I think this version of Gaze is relatively gonna be the most powerful one we've ever had. Easily, out of all of the teasers we've seen for all the schools, easily one of the biggest game changers for any one school. Moving right along to Mock. This is the other super used shad. What you see on your screen is the Spellman pass that they're going to be adding to Mockenspiel. Now, while Mockenspiel in Live Realm hits and then gives a random blade or weakness, it looks like they've completely revamped the spell for either path that you choose. The top path, you can upgrade it all the way up to making it a 7-pip shad. I would argue this is one of the hypest hits in PvE for balance now. And the utility is also very weird. I think what it's supposed to be is it can convert up to 3 blades that you have on yourself to universal blades, which balance can always use. I assume the intention is you're gonna elemental and spirit blade in order to use maybe some of your hits to use other school damage, and then you'll probably have at least 2 blades remaining. What the shad spell will do is it'll hit for a ton of damage and then take all those remaining blades and still give you value for them. Now, the bottom path of the spell, this is also a ridiculous new utility for balance. So at max tier, the bottom path of the spell does 470 damage, and unlike before where there was a chance you'd get a weakness or a blade, this is not only a guaranteed weakness, but it's more powerful, and there's 2 of them. Your eyes do not deceive you. It is 2 35% weaknesses, which is like a Catalan for 1 shad, but it's double as good for balance. It's ridiculous. For reference, right, in Live Realm, the reason why people use Mockenspiel is because they need some source of damage for having shads. But everyone will tell you that this random blade or weakness, you almost always want the weakness because it is just, like, numerically, it's just a better thing to get out of it. The fact that for 1 less shad, you're still doing more than half the damage of this, you're still using your shads, which is really important, and you're getting not 1 but 2 versions of the best outcome of this, it is absolutely in every way an upgrade compared to what we have right now. I kind of hope that because of the shad, they redesign Obsidian Colossus in general, because now you're looking at a 6-pip spell. Obviously, you don't need a shad to use this, but it's still a pretty pip costly spell for, you know, damage that does less and hanging effects that are worse than the shad. Now, I feel like that's a little sad. That's kind of annoying, you know. I hope that they, you know, think about that. Maybe we'll see a different Obsidian Colossus, hopefully. Moving right along to balance's shad AoE Nested Fury. This is what they're going to be doing to Nested. Now, the top path, it is a very small increase in damage for getting spell elements. I feel like some schools have been a hit or a miss with this. Balance for getting maxed here, The max hit on the Nested Fury top path does 20 extra damage. It's up to you whether you think the Spellmans are worth for that. I feel like for me, if I was just going to use this in PvE, I would barely feel the difference. The bottom path is a completely new utility though. I don't know how balance gets nice like this with literally everything, but this is a hit and harmful aura. It's very weird that they basically got rid of the elemental hit portion of, you know, this spell. I feel like the very nature of the way the spell looks, it looks like, you know, 1 of 3 elemental hits, but this is a balance hit, so it just works like every other balance spell. And the utility that you get is a harmful weakness aura on your opponent for 4 rounds, and it's a -30. So based on all the teasers that we've seen, this spell is going to be the second most powerful hit and harmful aura in the game when this update goes live. Only one that's going to be more, you know, potent than this harmful aura is the Storm Sultan. That's actually an even more powerful negative aura, but it's school specific, so it's way better. But I feel like balance, it's supposed to be the jack of all trades, master of none. I feel like the net value of this weakness aura is very high. Out of all the spells we've seen so far, this is the first one to me. Red flags, very, very OP for just a balance spell. I guess the good news for people that are worried about balance becoming too powerful, the damage for a 6-pip shad is honestly very, very little. I think the main reason, by the way, for the undervalued nature of the damage is because it's a selective targeting spell and it takes a small hit. This would actually be doing more than 600 if not for the selective targeting part. I think that has saved this spell from becoming literally OP, but we'll still see. I still think it could really have a shot at shaking up the meta in a way that makes balance even more commanding than it is right now. Now, thankfully, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm actually rooting for balance not to get complete W's because it would just like outvalue everything. Thankfully, it looks like they're back to the realm of reason with Worm. I'll be very honest. Top path, very, very modest increase for PvE. I mean, if you want to get Spellmans for a damage increase for a 4-pip shad, sure, but I think Mockenspiel is literally better and it gives a better utility. The bottom path is just a copy and paste ass double trap that we've seen from all the teasers. We now can expect a double trap shad from Mitt, from Ice, from Fire, and from Balance. And all 4 of those schools have hits that do universal traps as well. I actually don't mind Balance getting the hit and universal trap, but to me, the fact that the universal trap for Balance is 40%, it makes every other hit and trap that we've seen for the other schools in the teasers this week, it makes me feel like those are not valued highly enough. Again, Balance should not be getting the best of anything because they're very, very well-rounded in terms of what they can actually access. I don't mind Balance getting this. Maybe there's some niche strategies. I don't think it's particularly useful like any other hit and universal trap. But if Balance can be justified getting this, I don't understand why other schools that are trap-based aren't getting more powerful hit and traps that aren't universal. I think that's my big red flag out of this. Moving along to a shad that I think very few people use, Old Man's Endgame. This is what they're going to be doing to Old Man's Endgame. Now, the PvE path of this, right? It is an AoE, so keep that in mind. It's actually a pretty powerful AoE at that. 970 damage. For 8 pips in a shad, it is weaker than top path Nested will be. So if you're trying to get the best AoE, I would still argue that Nested is better for PvE. But the utility is pretty cool. It adds a balance convert that can convert balance damage to any random damage. Now, I honestly think that they're cooking with the balance convert thing. But in my opinion, I think it should be guaranteed in PvE anyways to convert to a school that boosts on your opponent. I don't know if they have the ability to do that, especially because they've actually literally changed boosting rules as we've had more arc, right? Ice used to boost on Fire, you know, in Arc 1, but eventually they made it so that Fire actually counters Ice, and I don't think most mobs have Ice boosting on Fire. Correct me if I'm wrong, but whatever it is, right? I think the convert should be a little bit more, like, I don't know, I feel like it should be a little bit more intentional rather than random, because I think that would actually make being on a balance way more exciting for PvE. The bottom path of the spell that's allowed in PvP is also a very, like Worm, honestly, nothing to really write home about, nothing too crazy. It is a 560 damage hit that has a detonating dot added onto it. However, unlike other damage over time schools, Balance has not a singular spell in their toolkit that does extra damage or even does anything too much extra for having a dot on your opponent. I could see the spell being used if you actually weave in as a balance into schools that give you fusion spells, they give you stuff for having a dot. That does exist. Balance doesn't naturally get spells that, you know, basically reward you for having dots on your opponent. It is a relatively weak dot. It's only 3 rounds, so even if you're trying to fulfill a conditional for having a damage overtime on your opponent, the window for taking advantage of that is really, really small. So I'm not really a billion% sure I could see this being used unless you're dueling into something that really rewards you for having a dot on your opponent. That does exist. I don't think balance naturally is going to be having a big affinity to the bottom path of Endgame. And finally, what you see on your screen is what they're going to be doing to balance Scion in test round. Now, the top path does 1950 damage in exchange for having 6 blades on yourself. If you run Pip Conserve, though, that is actually really not hard because you literally have 1 Pip triple blades, and if you use a power Pip on one of these and you run Pip Conserve, you actually get that extra Pip back. So if you're running Pip Conserve, it's actually a pretty easy thing to set up in PvE. You can even maybe do some universal buffs under these blades and then do a Scion. So pretty easy to set up, I'd say. And 1950 damage, that is a ridiculous amount for 11 Pips. So honestly, really, really cool spell to reward stuff that you already have in your inventory as a balance. And the bottom path, what I find very odd about this is that a lot of people consider Balance Scion overpowered. If y'all don't know, in PvP, right? The one that's allowed in PvP anyway, Scion does double damage if your opponent has more than 11 Pips. Now, there's 2 varying schools of thought on this. One school of thought is, it's pretty goddamn easy to just not be at 11 Pips. You just gotta use your Pips. That's actually very, very in the control of the person that's scared of the Balance Scion. But with things like 0 Pip trap auras and, you know, weaknesses and shields and all of that, these are all the super popular, useful spells. Almost every spell that's 0 Pips that people carry are used to build tempo as you build Pips and do something, right? Those types of spells really get punished because you're just not allowed to gain Pips after a certain point. So there are ways to take advantage. Like, let's say someone braces at 9 Pips and you trap aura over them, right? They can't brace again because they got Scion and they'll be at 11 because they'll be at 11 Pip. But basically, you can get the current version of Balance Scion simply by max tiering it, but if you don't max tier it, then basically the damage got nerfed. Essentially, as time goes on, the Balance Scion that's in live realm right now, as people get the spellments for it, will literally just be the same Scion that we end up having. So for people that think it's OP, I guess less people will have the really good version of Scion with max tiered spellments, I guess, for a while. But I'm of the opinion that compared to other spells that Balance has, I think the big ones being Scales, which gets tons of extra damage for being a 2 school Pip spell, and Judge, which has no real cap on the damage that it can do, I just don't think Scion is that crazy. All in all, y'all, I think this spellman update will be pretty massive for PvP more than PvE, something that we haven't seen as much. I think Gaze and Mock are going to be absolutely ridiculous. I think Nested could also really find its way into the meta. But now we're looking at a situation where Balance can easily fight Bubble, easily debuff. They have basically, if you count fusions, a hit and trap aura, hit and brace, hit and amplify, and hit and weakness aura. They have every type of hit and aura you could possibly imagine. When they have all of that, I don't think that spells like Judgment and Scales should be as good as they are. I think that's going to be my big takeaway. If not for Judge and Scales, I think Balance is just going to be a really fun school to play that's balanced. But with the addition of these shads and those spells existing, I think Balance is going to be kind of overpowered. Let me know what you guys think of these spells. I'm honestly so surprised they didn't add any swaps or echoes. I really thought that's the direction Balance is going, but I guess test realm isn't concluded yet. I would argue Balance is probably one of the most subject to changes because they could literally end up doing anything. Before reading y'all's thoughts on this, do y'all think that these are going to see use in PvP and PvE? Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. And as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon. And yeah.